Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome, welcome, welcome. It is Tuesday. It is 4 p.m. ET, and we are so thrilled that you have found us here on Crime Time on A Mighty Blaze. I'm your host, Hank Phillippi Ryan, the USA Today bestselling author of 16 going on 17 novels of suspense. My current book is the instant USA Today bestseller, All This Could Be Yours, which is now in a second printing, and thank you so much for that. I know this is all you, so I'm really, really grateful for that. And I sent in my copy edits for the new book, so I am floating. Anyway, we are not here to talk about me today, unless you want to, but basically, happily, luckily for me and you, we are here to talk with Matthew Pearl about his absolute gold standard of a book, The Award, which is recently out. It is, I know you all think that I say that everything that I read here is fabulous, and that's kind of true because we only bring you the best of the best books. And this is just the best of the best of the best. This book is spectacular. It's riveting. It's cringy. It's suspenseful. It's authentic. It's so, so funny. I cannot wait for you to hear all about it. If you are a writer, this is absolutely required reading, a must read. If you are a reader, this book is going to tell you all kinds of secret stuff that we probably shouldn't tell you. You're probably not even allowed to know it, but you can find it out in the award. It is brilliant in every way, and I am so honored and thrilled to introduce you to Matthew Pearl, who's coming to us today from South Florida. Welcome, Matthew, and congratulations on this.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, Hank, and for those kind words, which just means so much coming from you.
Well, I can't wait to talk with you about it. I mean, you all look at that cover. It is genius, and we'll talk more about that in a minute. But Matthew, talk about the brass ring. You got a briefly noted in the New Yorker. I mean, that is, when the book is about how cool you can be as an author, that is about as cool as you can get. What did you think when you saw that? And what did you think about what the New Yorker said about your book?
It's funny because, as you know, in the novel itself, there are characters who are obsessed with the New Yorker and willing to cross all kinds of lines to get some of their work noticed by the New Yorker, right?
Yeah.
So, I was very nervous when I heard that the New Yorker was going to run something in Briefly Noted. And for those who aren't familiar, so Briefly Noted is kind of the capsule reviews of books. And then sometimes they do long essays about books. Briefly Noted is actually a really, I think, kind of a fun format because the longer essays are almost more like think pieces, right? That include books in them. Whereas the Briefly Noted, you really get right to the point and get to learn about some new books. So this is me, Hank. Like as soon as I heard it, I was just petrified with fear, right? Yeah. not excited. My wife would say, no, you should be excited. No, I'm petrified. Yeah. But once I saw it, and I always try not to know when something that's making me nervous is even happening because then I won't sleep. But once I saw it, I was just so grateful that it landed in the hands of someone who really clicked with it, and it was just a really really generous kind of glimpse at the book that I'll really treasure that.
And I know you could probably recite it the whole thing by heart, but the line that the writer picked to illustrate the book, wasn't that so perfect? Tell us what that was and why that is perfect.
Yeah. So at the one you mean at the end of the Briefly Noted, where a character asks, "Is it better to be happy or to be a writer?"
Yeah. And there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. There you have the essence of the award by Matthew Pearl, and we're going to talk more about that. I know you're just already going to run and click and get your copy of this book, but wait for just a little bit longer so you hear more about it, so we can keep you here. Let me very, very quickly remind you that you are here on Crime Time on A Mighty Blaze, and my Mighty Blaze was started at the beginning of the pandemic more than 5 years ago now by the powerhouse duo of Jenna Blum and Caroline Levitt to keep us reading and keep us discovering new books and keep us discovering maybe our new favorite authors. And you might have found one here today with the award by Matthew Pearl. So let me tell you a little bit about Matthew Pearl. I'm going to read from this so I get it right. Matthew Pearl's books have been international and New York Times bestsellers and have been translated into more than 30 languages. His nonfiction has appeared in the New York Times and the Boston Globe and Slate, and he edits Truly Adventurous magazine. He has been chosen as best author in Boston Magazine's Best of Boston issue, and he received the Massachusetts Book Award for fiction. He lived in the Boston area for many years and now lives in Florida, and we do miss him. And let me not forget to tell you that if you leave a question or a comment or just general applause and adulation in the chat, you will be on the wheel of fun that we will spin at the end of the show and draw a winner, lucky winner. Renee is here and Mary Garrett is here and Andrew is here. This is so great. Kim Rudder is here and Renee Herskowitz. Hello. And Sue Street, Melody Borelli, Kathy Lanigan, Betty Fellows, and Shannon Hanson. So nice to see you all. I'll say hello to the rest of you as the show goes on. But Matthew, I have to tell you, I read this book on book tour on the plane from Des Moines to Boston. That is quite the flight. And I was laughing out loud as I was reading. And finally, the stranger sitting next to me goes, what is it that you're reading? So I showed him this book and I said, you just have to read this. So tell us about, hey, Miriam, tell us about this book. Just tell us a little précis of the book so people understand it.
So the award is about an up-and-coming writer named David Trent, who lives in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And he's struggling to find his path. He's not sure he has that special something. So this is something I think we can all relate to, whether we're writers or we're in other fields. Does he have that X factor that will make him stand out? This is a very common fear for writers in particular, in part because there's so many wonderful writers out there, so many books, right? So if I or David as a writer is putting themselves out there, what's going to make me stand out? So we meet David as he and Bonnie are looking, his girlfriend, Bonnie, are looking to move in together. They're looking for somewhere to live. This is not an easy task in the Boston area and Cambridge. So we're immediately sort of thrown into a type of competitiveness there too for the real estate market. And he's being dragged to yet another place that has all kinds of architectural oddities and limitations and bad terms in the lease. He just wants to get out of there. This is our first scene of the novel, when suddenly he hears from the realtor that below, because this is the top floor of a Victorian house, a very common arrangement in Cambridge, below them, where they're standing, is living a writer, a very famous writer named Silas Hale, a novelist that David idolizes. So suddenly in his mind, a light bulb goes off. This could be my X factor, living above Silas Hale, becoming friends with him, having him as my mentor, my guide, leading me through the literary battlefield. This is it. I need this. So David says, yes, we'll take it. And that's where we start our story of David trying to navigate what is a very cutthroat literary world of Cambridge, Boston, New England, that ends up with twists, turns, and life and death stakes.
It is so suspenseful. It is unbelievably suspenseful and really cringy along the way as well, in the best possible of ways. But David, your main character, from kind of moment one, is complex and interesting because he isn't good. Mm-hmm. In fact, right off the bat, essentially, we know he's pretty much a liar. Mm-hmm. How did you decide? And yet we're quite attached to him in a sort of approach avoidancy kind of way. How did you figure out that the complexity of who David was and how to make us root for him when maybe we shouldn't?
That's such a perceptive question, and a question that I know comes from someone who's so used to building the parts of a story, right? And it's such an honor to have you feel this novel suspenseful as a master of suspense yourself. And I one of the things with me, slight tangent, is I write in various spaces, starting with historical fiction and using thriller and mystery there, but also narrative nonfiction. So I'm always kind of jumping around a bit, and sometimes I don't know if where I land is going to be, if I'm going to be able to pull it off, right? So I love that you use the word cringe, because for this project, I wrote myself some rules on top of my document, and some rules, some kind of mantras. And one of them was cringe suspense. So that's how I was thinking about the type of suspense I wanted, is exactly what you picked up on. So, right, you asked a really good question, because I actually got stuck when I started writing. I wrote the first scene, as I just described, to our listeners and viewers here. And then I kept going, and I just was stuck, and I didn't know why I was stuck. And I realized that in chapter 2, I had to see where David had a tendency to slip into crossing a line, right? So I came up with something that let me do that, which is we just, this isn't a spoiler, because there are a lot of things that I don't want to spoil. We discover very early that in our backstory for David, he had been applying to MFA programs in creative writing, right? Graduate programs. And a very well-known literary novelist had promised him that she was going to write a recommendation for him. And he was so pleased and happy about this. He actually didn't need the recommendation, because they already had 2 others from writing instructors, but he was just so happy that he would have this 3rd recommendation from this novelist that he really respected. And then she just ghosted him. She never sent it. He sent her a reminder. So he decided he was going to write it himself, in her words, things that she had said to him, and use a false email address that sort of had her name incorporated into, and send it to the school. So we get our first glimpse, and that's what let me keep going. That's what let me sort of get into his mind. By the way, something very similar happened to me, which is that I was applying for a fellowship, and a novelist promised that she was going to do a recommendation, and then she disappeared. She ghosted me. I didn't fabricate or forge anything, but that's the difference sometimes between ourselves and our characters, right? Is that in this case, David crosses these lines. And why do we still root for him? Well, because what David has trouble with, he recognizes injustices, which I think we all tend to get, I know I do, get very worked up about injustices, and then maybe don't do anything about them, right? But where we can still root for David is, even though he's doing the wrong thing, he's crossing that line because he's struggling between how to accept something is unfair and the need to make something just, right? The need to kind of seek the justice in the unfair. Most of us will just stop at sort of grousing or feeling disappointed at the unfairness. So that was really key to setting up the character.
I mean, there are 2 big keys in making a story work, and I think in making the suspense work, and making the character work, and making the story work, is that someone has to supremely want something, beyond all description. And also, we have to see them and be with them as they make the series of decisions about how they're going to get that thing. And it's the process of being with David and watching him deeply want something and understanding that desire, and then being with him as he makes that series of decisions. Did you think about it that way at all? And was that fun to write?
Oh my gosh, it was so fun to write. And I think I would add to that, having people around him that are sort of projecting this darkness that he has to fight, because that's part of why we're rooting for him, right? Even when he's doing the wrong thing, he's doing it in relation to kind of this darker side of humanity / writers / publishing that he's working at. But it was so fun to write. And Hank, this was the first book since my first novel, The Dante Club, that I wrote in secret, essentially. In other words, I didn't tell anybody other than my wife and my kids, who ignore me, but that I was working on it, right? So, it was really kind of liberating. I just didn't end up talking to my agent or my editor, folks that we tend to sometimes kind of have collaborative thinking as we write, as we kind of hatch a project that we write. But this was the first time I did it. Your first book, you normally don't have anybody to tell anyway, right? That was my case with my first novel. Who was I going to tell? In this case, it really, I think I wrote it because I think I needed to write it on a couple levels. And also, it just was fun. The idea of it was fun to me. And the process, and that was one of my rules. I mentioned writing rules on the top of my document. One of them was have fun. And I had been burnt out from fiction a few years before that. I had switched to nonfiction for several years exclusively. I love both, but I had really burnt out on it. And this was kind of a revival of it for me. And part of that was having that rule for myself, which you cannot have for everything, which I wrote down on the document, which is that if anything was feeling like it wasn't fun, I was going to immediately stop and delete that word, sentence, paragraph, chapter, whatever it was, and start over at that point. Again, you don't want, or you can't have, it's not a realistic rule to have for everything you write. Absolutely not. Not everything is fun, but it was my rule for this.
It's interesting how you have a part of your brain that's sort of your editor brain, that's sort of keeping yourself sane and keeping the book on the track that you want it to be. And part of it is this sort of total immersion feel of this book, which almost doesn't feel like somebody else wrote it. It feels like, it feels like it just exists, that multi-track of an author's brain where you have to be in the zone to write something, but some part of you is monitoring the zone, for instance, in this case, to make sure it's fun and to make sure that it's cringe. Are you aware of those tracks in your brain? You must be a little bit as you're writing.
Yeah, I have started in the last couple of years, I kind of keep notes on the same document that I'm writing. So I keep kind of a writing journal mixed in with my writing. And so that's really helps me because, as you know, writing is can be such a solitary activity. On some level, it has to be, right? And we can find ways to adjust that. That you have to kind of talk to yourself one way or another, whether you're speaking out loud, whether you're writing it down, whether you're just able to kind of have those thoughts and recognize them. So yes, I'm very aware as I'm going, and I don't know. There's something about this was very cathartic for me.
I imagine it was. I can imagine you laughing and saying so many things that I won't say. It is funny. I learned from Sue Grafton to keep a writer journal because our feelings are so we forget how we feel at a certain time. Right. And so I thought, okay, I'm going to keep track of how I feel as I'm writing my book every day so that when I do the next one, I'll know that I've been through this before and came out the other end. But I stopped doing it. Well, it does. It's wonderful. But I stopped doing it because I kept writing, I have no idea. Day 3, I have no idea. Day 3, I have no idea. And I just didn't want to write that anymore. And it always turns out fine.
It's funny also, Hank, you mentioned picking up the book while you were on your tour, which is just wonderful for me to think about. And that was one of, when I would go on tours, well, now a lot of writers, if they're touring, and I don't tour much these days, but would just take an Uber from one place to another, right? But you remember all of the author escorts. So those were the drivers that would pick you up at the airport. Maybe you still run into some of them, take you to events, take you to the hotel. And I would sit in front with them and I would say, tell me, like, what are the craziest situations you've ended up with writers? What are the worst situations? And it's funny because I draw a lot from my own experience with other writers. And with myself, I don't leave myself sort of unscathed in what I draw from in kind of opening this world of writers. But it was funny. I won't name any names, but multiple author escorts, when I would ask what was the worst experience you ever had, named the same novelist and said, I won't say who it was. He would sit in the back. He would say, do not look at me. Do not make eye contact. And do not speak to me unless I speak to you. So that's an example. And my jaw would drop, right? But I heard it multiple times. And we see that in David's new neighbor, Silas Hale. That's an explicit moment that happens with Silas Hale. So it was so fun, speaking of fun, to have some of these parts of the writing and publishing world that that people normally don't get to glimpse, even us, as writers, because who do we keep around ourselves as writers? We, of course, try to keep people with positive energy, even right? But there's this darker side, and it was so fun to explore.
Well, that's what, it's interesting that you segue right into what my next question was going to be, because when you have a hero of a book like David, you have to have a villain or two of the book, and your bad guys are so supremely hilariously bad guys. Can you tell us about, the idea of the being in close proximity to a really famous author is so irresistible. We think, "Ooh, I want to stand by him. I want to stand by her. I'll get my picture taken with
Yes.
X, Y, and Z, and then I'll be famous too." That doesn't make any sense. And yet it kind of feels like it does. So the idea of a famous writer as a god or a hero or powerful can infect both sides of the equation, if you know what I mean. They really believe that they are, and we believe that they are too, because it seems like they are. Can you talk a little bit about that dynamic and that balance, and how you came up with Silas Hale and the other types in the book?
Yeah, great question, a great description of what that dynamic can be like. And Hank, I don't know about you, but I'd never had kind of a mentor in writing to lead me through. And I think both of us came to writing from other spaces and other worlds. I unlike David, I didn't go to an MFA program. I didn't get a writing degree. In fact, it was all very intimidating. The idea of writing was very intimidating to me, as it is to many, many people, including professional writers, right?
Yeah, sure.
And so for me, this novel is partially kind of an exploration of that thing that I didn't have in my journey, and how, in David's case, it goes very, very wrong. As I say, I witnessed firsthand. I've had encounters firsthand with writers who can be very competitive, in very shocking ways, trying to kind of sabotage or keep other people down. I'd be interested if you think so. One person pointed out to me that they wonder if it's more something experienced by male writers with other male writers, which I'd be curious what your opinion would be on that. But there's definitely a toxic sort of undergrowth in the writing world of certain writers. And I'm a very I suppress things. So in my own life, when something is upsetting or I have a bad experience with someone, I just kind of push it down. Mm-hmm. In fact, I don't talk about it usually. I try to forget. I literally try to forget it. So a lot of those experiences for me were things that I just never shared with anyone. I tried to kind of because I tend to sort of just blame myself. Oh, I must have said something awkward, right? Or I must have done something wrong for that. So for example, I started in historical fiction, right? So there were people I looked up to give a case of someone who was very positive, like Caleb Carr, who wrote The Alienist. Sweet, very quiet, but really sweet, supportive guy. Counterexample, Umberto Eco, who wrote Name of the Rose. I idolized this book. Oh man, opposite when I met him, and he's passed away, rest in peace, but really unfriendly, grumbly, essentially get away from me, as you're saying so like those experiences, and that I would feel ashamed by that, right? By like that moment, I wouldn't have shared before. So I needed the format of especially this format of a suspense novel to sort of get my character through those. So yeah, all of us have different experiences. I don't know if that sort of aligns with anything that you've.
And I do think that there's a real toxicity in envy and a real toxicity in jealousy, and wondering why somebody else has something that you don't have can be really destructive, especially in a world like publishing and books and writing, when it's not quantifiable, really. There's no thing you can get that says, okay, I'll just buy one of those, or I'll just do this, and that will work. So that yearning and that desire and that envy of strangers, even sometimes, can destroy people. And it can also empower the people who are being envied. And Silas Hale is just such, and if you've just joined us, we're talking about The Fabulous, the Award by Matthew Pearl. The famous author with whom David Trent shares a home is Silas Hale, who is just, that's even a Dickensian name that you've given him, is just the nastiest, meanest, most outrageously terrible person that you could possibly ever imagine. Where did the name come from? It's so New England. And what and how did you decide to make him like up to 11 in bad?
I don't remember if I had a specific thought process with the name. I usually just kind of collect names that I like the sound of. And I definitely was looking for a New England name. So I'm glad, or a name that sort of evoked New England. So I'm glad it does that. I actually think I kind of held back a bit from some of the real experiences that I've had. That's the funny thing, is that some folks are using the word satire in relation to the award, and I didn't think of it like that at all. And what I said to my wife was, I think, well, maybe it's satire if you haven't lived through, and she lived through some of the experiences with me. So yeah, it's so interesting to think of someone very powerful who no one can really threaten them, and yet they're still trying to kind of hold people down.
Yes.
And that's where Silas comes from, is that feeling of, especially of people who are celebrated. So that's sort of where I ran across people.
They get a big pass. The people who are super famous get a big pass.
Exactly.
And they're so successful, and that's just how they are.
And maybe it's part of their mystique, even, because one thing with writers, and this, is that when someone says, "What do you do?" and you say, "I'm a writer," it can be a hard conversation, because it's almost like you're saying, "I'm an alien from outer space" to some people, right? It can be, "Well, wait, what do you mean? So what do you do all day? So there's this already at a starting point. There's this idea of a writer as something different, as some kind of extraterrestrial to many people, because they don't. I never, when I was growing up, and I actually incorporate this for David. When I was growing up, and I grew up here in South Florida, at sort of the height of the space program, we had many astronauts visit our school, and I joke, except it's not a joke, that I met multiple astronauts before I ever ran across a writer. So to me, like, the idea of going to space or to the moon was much more realistic, especially given that in school, I think for you, for me, not so much now, I think, as I see my kids and what they're assigned. In school, you would mostly be reading dead people who were dead, right? Sure. Most of the books you would. So even that, there was no sense of, any of these people are alive, or these are real people, right? So the idea of a writer as an alien species, and so maybe those writers and other people in all kinds of walks in life who look down on us or look down on other people, it almost adds to their mystique and helps convince us, oh yes, this is an important person. They're looking down upon me.
Yeah. Oh, well, the question that comes next is, you say, "I'm a writer," and they say, "Have I read anything that you've written?" And then you say, "I don't know."
It's the automatic question somehow, even though all those people who ask that question aren't speaking to each other. And it's funny, because I heard a story from someone who was somewhere else in Florida, and it was a place where Dan Brown has a house, and they ran into Dan Brown, and they met him, and he said, "Oh, I'm a writer," and she said, "Oh, I've only read one book in my life, so I wouldn't." And he said, "Try me." What? And it was, sure enough. So it's so funny to think that
that's the best method.
Yes, that he can, right, that he can say that. But normally, when they say, "What have you written?" or "Have I read what you've written?" it's a very disorienting question, right? But it absolutely gets to the heart of what it feels like to be a writer, and especially can be disoriented because so many writers, obviously there can be a range of personalities that bring us to the writing world, but so many writers naturally are kind of introverted, and it's part of where, even if it's just one aspect of their personality. So it can be very disorienting, because as a writer, you want your work to be shared, you want people to read it, but you're not necessarily the person who's out there kind of pushing yourself or what you're writing on other people. So it can create this interesting dynamic. And I've always been amazed by the writers who feel, "I was born to write, I'm better than you as a writer." So that's where Silas Hale and Barnaby Masters, another antagonist in the novel, that's where they come from, as those writers that I came across over the years that I just couldn't figure out, where did you come from?
Barnaby Masters, I was just fainting. I've just met so many of them.
So many.
So I'm wondering how your New Yorker. That's why I was thinking about the New Yorker and how that would go over. Two things really quickly. One is, first of all, just I've never thought about that when I was in school. The writers that we were reading were all dead. That has never crossed my mind. So that's thought provoking. Thank you for that. And speaking of thought provoking, yes, I have heard this book described as satirical and super ironic. And I wonder if those words really mean thought provoking in this case, that you've fearlessly excavated the life of publishing and writing and competition, and how a writer has to, they're writing in their little studies like we do, but then there's the world, and there are people who are making decisions based on money and things that are subjective, and how one person can win an award, and how that can make a difference when maybe one guy picked that winner.
Right.
So talk a little bit about the sort of bravery that it took for you to sort of take that on, when some people, like I said at the beginning of the show, there's stuff you're not supposed to know in this book.
I love that way of putting it. And yeah, I think part of I don't mind anyone who enjoys satire and sees it as satire, but I think part of that might just come from, again, that we don't usually show all of the warts and all of how it works to be a writer, and what it's like to be in publishing. For me, it was probably, I've never written anything that's drawn from my life. So this was really new to me in a couple ways, and that was one of them. And I'm a very private person, and that always, especially for someone who kind of stumbled into writing, that always terrified me. And I've only written before this, I think maybe one article I wrote that had some pieces that came from my own life related to the topic that I was writing about. And that was it. And even that was intimidating for me. So this in order to write about this world, I mean, it was almost just a cheat code for me, that I was drawing from what it's actually like, right? Yeah. And I think people don't realize how much of the writing world is what I'd call gladiatorialized. Like, writers are pit against each other in a way that doesn't exist. Writers are expected to review other writers negatively, by the way, because that gets more attention. You don't see that in film, do you? They don't ask Steven Spielberg to write the review of whatever rival director it would be. You just wouldn't. It would be odd. And yet we see that all the time. That's why it's so refreshing to see, especially in the last couple of years, like this platform and the interviews that you do, kind of positive platforms and communities and reinforcement of each other, kind of really front and center. It's real. And by the way, the punchline of all of this, Hank, is that in writing and this cathartic novel about the sort of darker side of writing and publishing, I've gotten so many positive comments and new connections to writers who have reached out, and such wonderful, generous words, including from yourself, that's the irony. It's sort of rebooted my own faith and confidence in myself and in fiction.
I saw a wonderful review. I'm sure you didn't ask him, from Joe Finder.
No, I didn't. Yeah.
He put it on Facebook. Let me not forget, we're talking about the award, and let me not forget as our time ticks by, which is so crazy. This is a very suspenseful murder mystery. I don't want you not to know that, you all. This is not just writers yammering about writing, and there's very little actual writing in the book. Yeah. But this is a murder mystery. It is a locked room mystery, a spectacularly, it's a police procedural. All of those things go into the book. It's so much fun to read, so suspenseful, so twisty. Two more fast things. And one is the house where this takes place in Cambridge. Is that a real house? And can you describe it at all? And I absolutely loved that.
So I lived in multiple places in Cambridge. I went there for college, and then I lived there and met my eventually was my wife, is my wife, and we lived in multiple places. So everywhere we lived in Cambridge had different. So the house is drawn from multiple places that I experienced in Cambridge, and everywhere we lived, we were surrounded by writers. So it's kind of an amalgam of our experiences, and I love that jumped out at you, because it was definitely a favorite part to write.
And Lori's saying, well, thank goodness there's a dead body. Yes, there is. And I will.
Oh, and I should say, I love that you read it on an airplane, because I'm hearing that actually for some reason from multiple people, and that if this helps your listeners and your viewers to get a sense of the pace of the novel, and that they didn't want the plane to land because
100%.
they needed to finish the story. So that was my goal. Just sort of having that. It's the movies I was watching when I would take breaks were Hitchcock. That's sort of what I wanted: the claustrophobia and the need to see what's happening next.
The pacing is amazing in this book, and I so agree. I was glad that the plane flight was long. That's the first step. The other thing about it is that it is such a masterclass in suspense, and it is a really solid, surprising mystery where you will not be able to figure out what happens in the end. And they're like not little, but they're like time bombs that go off throughout the ending, like kablam, 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 which was so much fun. Did you know what all that was going to be, or did you write to that? This story really unfolded pretty organically, where I could see where it was going. That's not always the case. As you know, every project can have a different kind of anatomy of how it comes together. One of my rules, I keep going back to the rules I wrote for myself that I still have on the top, was no trick twists. So what I meant by that to myself, and I've written things that have this, I will write things that have that, there's nothing wrong. But for this story, I didn't want to have, the mastermind of the events was really this quiet barista who was listening in. I didn't want anything like that where we are kind of playing unfair by the rules of this book. Again, I've done things like that. I will do them. Yeah, I really wanted all of the twists and turns and suspense to come from the character of David, from the smart decisions he makes, from the lines he crosses that he shouldn't cross, but everything coming from him. And I love that how much of it is about perception and having made a decision about a thing and accepting that decision as true. And so we do too. And that's what makes the multiple ending. So there's not just one ending, you all. And we're talking about The Award by Matthew Poole, which sometimes, it's always hard to land the plane, at the end of a book. It's always hard to write a book where people at the end will say, oh, I never saw that coming. I should have seen that coming. I can't believe that. And I'm pretty good at figuring these out. I just did not see how we were going to do this. So many, many congratulations on this. This is spectacular. I hope you'll come back and look at the comments later, because there's just lots of accolades and people saying that they can't wait to read this. A couple of people have said that they're going to buy it for themselves for the holidays. Good idea.
Thank you so much.
And a couple for your pals. That would be great. But let me close by, I have a million more questions. You'll have to come back and talk to us about this book again. Oh, I have to ask one more thing though. There was a moment in the book where somebody, and I don't remember who it was, did something with their mouth, like they licked their lips, something. So I remember when I was reading it, I thought, how would you do that? And I stopped and I did that to see how I would do that. And then later in the book, you say, it's my job as a writer to say, if I write somebody licked their lips like this, for you to stop, to have it be so vivid that you stop and do that, then I have done my job. And that's what I did it in the book. And then I thought, oh my gosh, Matthew, you got me. So,
I love that you noticed that. Yeah. So that's Silas Hale, who is talking about his control over a reader, and that when he describes licking lips, a character licking their lips, the reader is going to do it. That came from, I noticed that when I was reading books is that when there was a description of doing something with your mouth, you tend to do it while you're reading it. And somehow I noticed that, and I must have filed it away. And then I wanted something for Silas to, because Silas has a very specific perception of his relationship with readers, which is that he is in charge, that readers are kind of his minions. And that's why they read him, so that he can control them. So I wanted an example where he could kind of dramatize that, and while you're reading him dramatizing that you actually, obviously I don't know if everyone does, but if you're me or you're you're actually doing the thing that he's saying that you'll do. So yeah, there's sort of a meta moment there, and I'm so glad it worked for you.
I loved it. And you all have had this happen to you all. I know that you have, that you'll read that an author says something like, she tilted her head and lifted an eyebrow, and you go like this to, see how that will feel.
And it's something about reading it yourself. If we read it out loud, I don't think it wouldn't be that. It's not someone saying that out loud. It's while you're reading it. I think it must be some neurologist could maybe explain it to us. My theory is there's something in the brain that makes you at least a little bit try it out.
It absolutely does. And you did it, and you got me. So, and we're talking about the award by Matthew Pearl. There's a wonderful video on Matthew's Instagram which is what, Matthew Pearl, writer?
Matthew Pearl, author.
Matthew Pearl, author. So after the show is over, not right now, but after the show is over, go follow Matthew Pearl and look at the video, the reel about the choosing of the cover. It is really revealing, and shows how genius. Look at this author on the top of a typewriter or staircase. And what did your 12-year-old daughter say about it?
Yeah, so my 12-year-old daughter, Lulu, commented that it's kind of the climb of success and ambition. And she asked me if he's at the top of his success, why is he looking down sad like that? So very, very perceptive of Lulu to point that out, because that's very much part of the novel. And I love about this cover, and I say it in the reel, the Hitchcockian feel of it, because I mentioned that was one of the sources of inspiration.
Well, I would love to see this as a movie. We'll talk about that another time. But one of you lucky people will get to take home a copy of the award. We're going to spin the wheel of fun right now. I forgot to take questions. We'll do that in a minute. We'll spin the wheel of fun and see who wins. Doing this all out of order because I'm so ebullient about this book. And the winner is... No, Mighty Blaze. This is Margaret in the back room. We can't win. Spin it again. Margaret wants this book, and she's making it happen. And we will. The winner is Linda Hurtado, Dog Mom. Linda Hurtado, Dog Mom. I can read that. Linda Huerto, I guess that is. Linda Huerto, Dog Mom. Got it. Linda, woof, woof, you win this. Aru. And we will get this sent to you. I forgot to do questions. Okay, let's do the questions. I love to hear questions from you all. Let's do that right now. Who has a question for Matthew? I'm sure Margaret is now putting away the wheel of fun and redoing her. There we go. Yes, Tessa Calloway is my character in my book, which is also about an author, and Andrew Ball is a good pal. So that's great. Thank you. And absolutely, yes, indeed. Let's take another question, Andrew. You're great. Was the present chapter 1 always first, or did you start the plot in another space? And how did you land on that fabulous first line?
Thank you, Margaret, for asking, and thank you, Hank, for adding the nice comment about the first line. Yeah, I always pictured this starting with David and his significant other looking at the space that they're going to live in. As I said, this novel, not every writing project has to come together kind of in one piece or organically. This one, it really did flow as I was planning it. And that first line, which just to sort of flag it for the reader real quick, if he could have known all the lives that would be wrecked, David still would have agreed to all that was to come. That I didn't add until later. So that was originally it was just jumping into looking at the unit on the top of the Victorian house. So that was something I added later. Originally I did think the novel was going to end with a different scene. Obviously, we won't talk about where it ends, but with a different scene than it did, and with a different set of circumstances that I was thinking than it did. So it's not to say it didn't evolve, but that beginning was always something I envisioned.
I mean, the beginning is interesting because it does show that whatever happened has happened.
Right.
and he's now telling us this.
Right. So one thing, Hank, that of course you'll get right away because you're so used to the nuts and bolts of putting together stories, is one challenge for me with this first chapter is that this is a suspense novel. But our first chapter is looking at real estate. So it's not like we're opening with, okay, a dead body is falling out of, someone's trunk or something. So I needed to be able to suggest to the reader as quickly as possible, in this case, the first line, that things are going to go very wrong, but without saying it too on the nose that it feels like it kind of falls flat or too easy. So there was definitely some sort of negotiation with myself there, because I wanted to start with kind of everyday life for David, but I also wanted to make sure the reader knew what type of book they're
and you just say how many lives were wrecked.
Yes,
so something happened, and we're right on the train.
Exactly.
We're right on the train with you. Who else has a question? Really, I just did an article about great first lines, and that's in it actually.
Oh, nice.
Mary Garrett, hey Mary, storyteller Mary says, so which is better, happy or being a writer?
It's such a great question, and look, I talked about some of the darker side of writers that I encountered and how I incorporated some of that into this. That said, every writer's a little crazy, myself included. I don't want to speak for you, Hank, but certainly myself included. Okay. And I've put some of myself even in the darker characters, because there is something that we always have to kind of check ourselves, right? I mean, I almost every writer I know, when they're thinking about getting pregnant, they're deciding, well, wait, but should I finish this? I need to finish this book first before, and you have to kind of remind each other or yourself, no. You're still a person. You can, not specifically about pregnancy, obviously everyone is different, but just there are ways in which your brain kind of gets taken over by, when is my book going to be done? And am I going to have time to write it? And so it's definitely better to be a happy writer, I think is the goal, but sometimes that can be hard because the writing can take on a life of its own.
And also, I think being a happy writer means sort of having decided to be a happy writer and understand that sometimes happiness is going to just be in about 15 minutes when you get your words done, and then you're going to be happy. Then you're going to be happy.
And to keep writing. I think sometimes when you stop writing, you can get sort of stuck on yourself. If you let yourself kind of get caught up and worried about writing perfectly, for example, and it stops you from writing. So you also have to be able to give yourself the grace of writing things that maybe aren't going to turn into a book or into a finished chapter, but also don't let you sort of paralyze yourself creatively.
I tell my classes, you can fix it later.
Exactly.
It's not a test. You're just doing it.
It's not in real time. Right.
Exactly. Do we have time for one more question? Do you, Matthew, have time?
Oh, I have time.
Okay. So Renee, hi Renee, who's also in Florida, aren't you, Renee? Are you? Says, which author would you love to meet that you haven't yet?
Oh my gosh, that's such a...
Let's do Dead or Alive.
Dead or Alive, right? That's such a great question. It's I don't know that I have the perfect answer off the top of my head, but I started, as I mentioned, in historical fiction. My first books were all historical fictions about writers. So definitely there's some of those writers that I tried to figure out who, I think my goal as a writer, because I kind of fell into writing accidentally, was sort of subconsciously to figure out what it means to be a writer. So back to our kind of little part of our snippet of our conversation, when someone says, what do you do? And I'm a writer. What does that mean? And when can you say that? So even someone like Edgar Allan Poe, who I wrote about, even though I know he was a very unfriendly person to most, would be just really fascinating, because that question still kind of lingers, especially about those writers that we'll never get to see as people. So yeah, he would be, definitely be fascinating.
You could do a book with Edgar Allan Poe meets Umberto Eco.
Oh yeah, right. That's a good point. Yeah.
I guess I would like to meet Edith Wharton.
Oh, nice.
That would be really cool. Sometimes
I always heard she wrote in bed, right? Like she would write in bed and throw the pages around, which I have to admit, I like to write in bed too.
Oh, you do?
Yeah.
Your secretary would pick up the pages and type. like, ta-da, this is
It sounds great.
dogs. Anyway, this has been completely wonderful, Matthew. And congratulations again to Linda Huerta, Dog Mom, for winning the award. The rest of you, you know what to do. Run, 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 click, click, click. Get your own copy of the award. Very quickly before we let you go, let me remind you that next week, on Crime Time, a very special Crime Time, on Tuesday at 4 p.m. ET, we're going to bring Margaret Pinard, the producer, out of the back room and onto the stage, and also Karen Belovich, our booker. And the three of us are going to talk about the books we loved the most over the year, and you know what is going to be one of them, The Award by Matthew Pearl. So we will do a lot of giveaways. So join Karen and Margaret and me next Tuesday at 4 p.m. ET for a very special show. Betty Fellows, did you see that we are having Sherry Thomas on the back room next month? And that is absolutely because of you. So thank you. Matthew, again, thank you so much for coming today.
Thank you so much for having me. I could talk for hours more.
Me too. I could too. Come to Boston and we'll do that. Yeah. You all, thank you so much for coming today. And we will see you the next time on Crime Time. And remember, till then, it is always safe inside a book.